Go ahead, Senator Boyhan.
Okay, well, firstly, thanks very much, and I want to particularly thank Paula and the team for coming in today. I took the time this morning to look back at some of the various meetings, and I particularly draw your attention to Tuesday, the 10th of November 2000, which yourself and the board and Terry Sheridan were in. And, you know, all along, we've had this consistency, particularly from the board. They have enough resources to do the job, and yet clearly they didn't deliver on some aspects of it. So I just think that was important. I suppose, really, firstly, I want to start off by saying I welcome having this pre-legislative scrutiny. You will recall, members of the committee, that the Minister wrote to us on the 23rd of July 2021, suggesting we would waiver the pre-legislative scrutiny. And if anything we've learned over the summer months is, and various media commentators have talked about, is rushed legislation is bad legislation. And so I'm glad that we took a decision to have this pre-legislative scrutiny. It wasn't a given, and there was a request, as I say, and I'm glad that that didn't happen. We didn't accede to the Minister's request. I think that's an important point to make. Also, I want to thank the Secretariat for today circulating the regulatory impact analysis, the RIA, because I think that makes for very interesting reading, and I only first saw that last night. And I think the commentary there was particularly interesting, and it's something we always must keep an eye to when we're looking at new legislation. Then just to go on, we had, of course, a midterm review of this SHD. This shouldn't come as any great surprise to the department. All these problems weren't out as part, or were certainly raised and discussed. And we know that there were 22 recommendations from this report, which was published by your department in September 2019. We know 190 and county councillors, indeed senators, and indeed TDs. And I think as a committee we should revisit this report and look at every detail of it, because a lot of work was done there, and the people who made those submissions felt that it just don't. And it's very interesting to see the reoccurring themes that we're talking about here today that are in this report. So I suppose I really just want to say, look, the SHD, as far as I'm concerned, was a total failure. Yes, it fast-tracked in terms of planning applications, but we didn't see it in the commencements that we expected and the delivery of the housing. And I think that's an important point, and one that we'd have to accept it didn't happen. And this concept and suggestion that An Bord Pleanála would somehow become a one-stop shop and cut times, and etc. It did nothing like it. It ultimately cut out locally elected representatives. It cut out local authorities, planning authorities, and it had a very, very bad impact, and it cut out third-party appeals. And I've always maintained it was in breach of the Aarhus Convention. And it is not what's acceptable in terms of public engagement in the planning process. And I want to some way acknowledge the Green Party. While they didn't get it over the line as part of their discussions with the programme for government last year, they did get a commitment it would end. And I hope it will end, and I hope it'll end fast. If there's any fast tracking we need to do is to fast track an end to this process. I think it's a bad one. I suppose I just want to make one call. The CCMA are coming in next week. I note that the AILG, the Association of Irish Local Government, or LAMA, were not invited to this process so far. Now, we may have other meetings, and I think, Chair, you've indicated we are having more, but I think that's really, really important. And I suppose what I'd be asking, I understand that the president of the AILG, Councillor Mary Hode, wrote to the Minister, wrote to the department, and made two asks, and I'm going to reiterate these asks now. One, a mandatory consultation channel for elected councillors similar to that which is in the outgoing Act of 2016, Section 8.4 and 5. So that worked. Let's look at something that did work. That engagement worked. And two, this really controversial issue is this prohibition on the characteristics conflicting with the planning authority's development plan being included by the applicant, i.e. the developer. So they're coming out and saying they're going to contravene the plan. There should be a prohibition on that. So the AILG have written to the department. You may be aware of this, Paul. And I think they're two very reasonable asks. And I today want to see that, I'm delighted we welcome back the two-stage process. We should never have got this too far. And when we have to accept that, the government got it wrong. And some of the people on this committee were there then. We said it, we pointed out all these pitfalls. But I just want to make the point, the mistakes were made. and it was wrong. And I just hope that you will take on board, and you might just comment on those two AILG objectives and what's the likelihood. And hopefully you will be positively supportive on behalf of the department in relation to those two requests. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Boyhan. You just have about 1 minute, Mr. Hogan.
Yeah, so we are aware of the correspondence. It has come in through the Minister's office, and we obviously are considering it in the course of developing this legislation. I think, as I mentioned earlier, the mandatory consultation with elected members, we just need to be careful how that fits into the process, because it has to be borne in mind the elected members make the development plan, so they are the policy-making body as the planning authority. The executive is delegated to make the decisions on the planning applications. And as I've mentioned already, there is a privileged position available to elected members whereby you can make submissions on an application, within the 5 weeks and have that recorded and take it further from there if need be. I think, the point at which elected members and how they interact with the process needs to be very carefully considered, given that balance between the policy-making role on the one hand, the duty of the executive then to implement the plan, and also the right of the elected members already to sort of make a submission and appeal. So I think that we don't want to overload the process on the one hand, but we do want to enable people to I suppose to lead a response on the other. So I think that there's a very careful balance to be considered there that we think we have already. In relation to the second issue, the prohibition on conflict with a plan, one of the things separate to all of this discussion is we do want to strengthen local development plans, whether it's the county plan, whether it's local area plans. We want them to be more meaningful and more detailed, so that we get away from maybe everything riding on the planning application and that being the point at which things are decided and it's a surprise to people.
Sorry, Mr. Hogan, I'm sorry, I have to interrupt you there.